In May of 1945, Samuel Price walked into his apple orchard and saw every branch bending the wrong way. Not from wind, not from weight, from disease. The new shoots had curled into black hooks, one after another, as if someone had passed through the rows during the night and burned the tips with a match. 3 weeks earlier, those trees had been the pride of Grand Traverse County, Michigan. 72 acres of apples, more than 4,000 trees, a harvest big enough to pay the bank, repair the barn roof, and keep Samuel's 2 sons from leaving the farm for factory work in Detroit. Now the orchard smelled faintly sweet. That was the worst sign. Healthy apple trees smell green. Dying ones smell like sugar turning bad. His neighbor, Edwin Marsh, stood beside him with his hat in his hands. "Fire blight," Edwin said. Samuel did not answer him. He already knew. The county agent had been there the night before. He had cut open a branch, seen the amber ooze, and said the words no orchard man wanted to hear. "Cut it out if you can. Burn what you cut. If it reaches the main limbs, burn the trees." For Samuel, that was not advice. That was a funeral. Because the infection was not on one tree. It was in rows. It was in blocks. It had reached the young grafts on the west slope and the old Baldwins near the lane. The agent had looked over the whole orchard and gone quiet. Then he said, "You may be fighting for next year now." Next year did not exist if this year died. Samuel owed the bank $6,200. Edwin owed almost $4,000. Between the 2 farms, one bad season could turn 80 years of family work into paper on a courthouse wall. And then the German woman spoke. She had been living on the Price farm for 5 weeks under county supervision, one of the foreign wartime workers placed on farms when local labor disappeared into uniforms and factories. Her name was Klara Vogel, 37 years old, a farmer's daughter from the Rhine Valley. Quiet, careful, so thin from the war that Samuel's wife kept slipping extra biscuits into her lunch pail. Klara had said almost nothing since the day she arrived, but that morning she stood at the edge of the orchard, looking at the blackened shoots with an expression Samuel did not understand. Not fear, not pity, recognition. She pointed to one curled branch. "You are cutting too high," she said in careful English. Samuel turned. "What?" "You cut where you see the sickness. That is too high. The sickness is already below it." Edwin gave a tired laugh. "The college men have been growing apples longer than you've been in this country." Klara did not look at him. She kept looking at the trees. "In my village, if we cut where the black begins, we lose the orchard. If we cut where the tree still looks healthy, we save it." Samuel should have dismissed her. A German woman, a captive worker, no degree, no office, no reason for 2 American orchardmen to trust her over the county agent and the state agricultural college. But Samuel looked past her into the rows, and the rows looked back like a debt collector. So he asked the only question desperation leaves a man. "What would you do?" Klara said, "I would stop the roads." Not kill the disease, not pray over the trees. Stop the roads. That phrase would be repeated in Michigan orchards for the next 20 years. But on that morning, it sounded like nonsense. Klara explained with her hands. Fire blight did not sit politely on the black part of the twig. It traveled down through the living wood, ahead of what the eye could see. Every infected shoot was a road. Every pruning cut made too close to the damage left the road open. Every dirty blade carried the sickness into the next tree. The American method Samuel had been taught was too quick, too neat, too trusting of what could be seen. Klara's method was uglier, crueler, and, she insisted, safer. She wanted every infected shoot cut 12 to 18 inches below the visible damage. She wanted each blade dipped between cuts. She wanted the wounds brushed with a thick wash made from slaked lime, copper dust, stove ash, and sour skim milk. Samuel stared at her. "Sour milk?" "It holds the wash on the cut," she said. "Rain does not take it so easily." Edwin shook his head. "Ash and sour milk. That's what we're down to?" Klara finally turned to him. "No," she said. "You are down to hours." That line changed the room. By noon, Samuel had put every available hand in the orchard. His sons, Edwin's hired men, 3 foreign workers from the county camp, 2 widows who came with pruning shears wrapped in flour sacks. Klara stood at the wagon and made the wash. 3 parts slaked lime, 1 part sifted ash, a careful spoon of copper powder, enough sour skim milk to make it cling to the brush. She would not let anyone guess. She measured with a cracked teacup and the patience of a surgeon. Then she walked the first row herself. She found a blackened twig, traced it backward with her finger, and cut far below the visible death. Samuel flinched. "You're taking too much." Klara dropped the branch into a barrel marked for burning. "If you love the tree too gently," she said, "you leave the knife inside it." That was when Samuel understood. Her method was not a charm. It was discipline. It was knowing where mercy ended and saving began. For 2 days the orchard sounded like metal. Clip, dip, cut, brush, burn. Clip, dip, cut, brush, burn. By the second evening, there were piles of infected branches smoking in the north field. Samuel's hands were blistered. Edwin's shoulders had gone stiff. The younger men had stopped joking. Klara did not stop. She moved from row to row with a strip of cloth tied around her palm, marking dangerous limbs with bits of red yarn so no one missed them. Every few hours, Samuel caught one of the men watching her. Not because she was strange now, because she was in command, and nobody had said it out loud. On the 3rd morning, the county agent returned. His name was Thomas Reeve, and he had come expecting to find Samuel defeated. Instead, he found half the orchard white-streaked with lime wash, and the German woman shouting instructions in 3 languages from the back of a wagon. He looked at the barrels. He looked at the ash. He looked at the sour milk pails. Then he looked at Samuel. "What in God's name are you doing?" Samuel wiped his knife on a rag. "Trying not to burn my orchard." Reeve's face hardened. "This is not recommended practice." "No," Samuel said. "Recommended practice told me to give up." "That is not what I said." "It is what I heard." Reeve walked into the rows, broke a treated branch from a tree, and held it up like evidence in court. "You realize this wash may damage the tissue." Klara stepped down from the wagon. "It will damage less than the fire." Reeve looked at her as if noticing her for the first time. "And you are?" "Klara Vogel." "She worked orchards in Germany," Samuel said. Reeve's expression cooled. Germany is not Michigan. Klara nodded. No, but trees do not know which country men have drawn around them. That sentence traveled faster than the disease. By afternoon, half the township knew Samuel Price was letting a German woman treat his orchard with sour milk and stove ash. Some came to laugh. Some came because their own trees were beginning to show the same black hooks. One man stood at the fence and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "If that works, I'll eat the barrel." Klara did not answer. She was bent over another branch, counting backward from the visible damage with her thumb. That night, the county agent telephoned the plant pathology office at the State Agricultural College. The answer came back the next morning. It was polite. It was professional. It was devastating. There was no evidence that milk, ash, or lime paste could cure fire blight once infection had entered the wood. Copper might help prevent surface spread, but on infected tissue it was limited. Aggressive pruning was useful only if done correctly. Excessive cutting could reduce yield. Improper sanitation could make spread worse. The professor's conclusion was short. The growers should follow established recommendations and avoid untested folk treatments. Reeve brought the message himself. He found Samuel in the barn, sharpening pruning knives. "You need to hear this from someone who understands the disease," Reeve said. Samuel listened. Edwin listened. Klara listened from the doorway. When Reeve finished, the barn was quiet, except for the rasp of Samuel's thumb along the blade. Edwin looked at him. "Sam?" One word, but it carried everything. The bank, the trees, the fear of looking foolish, the terrible comfort of surrendering to official advice. Samuel looked at Klara. For the first time since the work began, he saw doubt pass across her face. Not doubt in the method, doubt that anyone would let her finish it. He asked her, "Can you prove it?" Clara's answer was almost a whisper. "Not before you must decide." That was the darkest moment. Because real faith in practical knowledge does not feel grand. It feels like choosing with no guarantee. Samuel had a letter from a professor. He had a dying orchard, and he had a woman everyone in town was ready to dismiss. He put the knife down. "Then we finish." Reeve exhaled sharply. "If this fails, Samuel, no one will say you were not warned." Samuel turned back to the blades. "If it fails, I'll lose the orchard. If I stop now, I've already lost it." They worked the rest of that day and deep into the evening. By lantern light, the white paste on the cuts looked ghostly. The rows seemed wounded on purpose, every tree carrying small pale scars where disease had been chased out of the wood. Klara insisted on burning the infected branches before midnight. Not tomorrow, not when convenient, before midnight. Samuel stood beside her at the burn pile while the black hooks collapsed into flame. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Klara said, "My father taught me this after the hard spring of 1931. We lost the pear trees first. He cried when he cut them. My grandmother slapped his hand and said, 'Cry after the orchard is safe.'" Samuel almost smiled. "She sounds severe." "She kept us fed." The next morning, they waited. That was worse than the work. On the first day, nothing changed. The black leaves were still black. The wounds looked raw. The neighbors at the fence looked pleased with themselves. On the second day, the same. On the third day, Samuel walked the west slope before sunrise with a notebook in his pocket and a sickness in his stomach. He had marked 20 trees that were spreading fastest before the cutting. He started with the worst one. Old damage remained. The blackened shoot was gone. The cut below it had dried under the lime wash. But the nearest healthy leaves were still green. He moved to the next tree. No new hook. The next, no amber ooze. The next, no blackening beyond the cut. Samuel began walking faster, then running. Row after row, the disease had not vanished. It had stopped moving. He found Edwin already in the north block, standing under a Duchess apple tree with his hand pressed against the trunk. Edwin's face was pale. "Sam," he said, "I know." "No, look!" Below a cut that should have failed, a tiny green bud was pushing out. New growth. Not much, not a miracle, just a pinhead of green on a tree everyone had already sentenced. Samuel went to find Klara. She was in the wash shed cleaning brushes. He could not speak at first, so he held out the twig, a wounded branch, a sealed cut, a new bud. Klara looked at it and closed her eyes. Only then did Samuel realize she had been afraid too, not of being wrong, of being right too late. By the end of the week, the west slope was full of small green returns. The blight had not disappeared from the orchard, but it had been cornered. The cuts had trapped it in dead wood. The wash had sealed the wounds. The repeated dipping had kept the workers from carrying infection tree to tree. The method was not magic. It was a chain of small refusals. Refusing to cut too little. Refusing to use a dirty blade. Refusing to leave infected wood on the ground. Refusing to believe that knowledge only counted when it came stamped on college paper. Thomas Reeve came back on the 10th day. This time he did not laugh. He counted trees. He checked cuts. He scraped a treated wound with his knife and smelled the wood beneath. Then he asked Klara to show him exactly how she measured the distance below visible damage. She showed him. He took notes. Edwin folded his arms. "Thought it wasn't recommended." Reeve did not look up. "It may become recommended after someone studies it properly." 3 weeks later, Dr. Nathaniel Orr from the State Agricultural College drove north to see the orchard himself. He arrived in a clean suit and left with lime dust on both sleeves. For 4 hours, Klara walked him through the rows. She showed him the red yarn markers, the burn barrels, the knife jar, the wash recipe, the difference between a cut made for appearance and a cut made to stop movement. Dr. Orr listened at first like a man being polite. Then he listened like a man losing an argument to the trees. At the end of the 3rd row, he removed his hat. "Mrs. Vogel," he said, "I owe you an apology." Klara stiffened. "I am not Mrs. Vogel." "Miss Vogel, then." "I dismissed the treatment because the ingredients sounded crude. That was careless. The important part was not the romance of the recipe. It was the system." Samuel glanced at Edwin. No one had expected that word. System. Dr. Orr pointed to the nearest tree. "You cut below the bacterial advance. You sterilized the blade between cuts. You sealed the wound with an alkaline copper-lime coating. The milk acted as a binder. The ash dried the surface. The burning removed inoculum from the orchard." He shook his head. "Individually, none of those steps is remarkable. Together, under pressure, with discipline, they changed the outcome." Klara said nothing. Dr. Orr looked at her more carefully. "Where did you learn it?" "My grandmother's orchard." Did she write it down? No. Why not? Klara's answer was quiet. People who are trying to survive do not always have paper. That line stayed with him. By harvest, Samuel Price did not have the crop he had dreamed of in April, but he had a crop. The early blocks were thin, the infected trees carried scars, the west slope produced only 60% of its usual apples. But the north rows surprised everyone. The final count came to just over 8,000 bushels, enough to pay the note, enough to keep the farm, enough to make the men at the fence stop joking. Edwin Marsh saved his orchard, too. When the first wagons rolled out under gray September sky, Samuel placed one crate aside and carried it to Klara. The apples were not perfect. Some were small, some were marked by hail. One had a scar near the stem that looked almost like a healed cut. Samuel set the crate at her feet. "You saved more than trees," he said. Klara touched one apple with her thumb. "No," she said. "The trees wanted to live. We only stopped cutting badly." That was Klara. She never turned survival into theater. But other people did. The story spread across the county first, then across the fruit belt. Growers came to the Price farm carrying notebooks, questions, and private shame. They had called the method foolish before they needed it. Klara taught them anyway. She showed them how far below the black to cut, how long to dip the blade, how to mix the wash thick enough to hold but not so thick it cracked, how to burn infected wood before the dew returned. Some men tried to thank Samuel. He pointed them to Klara. Some tried to thank the college. Dr. Orr corrected them. The college is studying what she already knew. Within 2 years, the method had been cleaned up, measured, renamed, and printed in extension bulletins as an emergency sanitation protocol for severe orchard blight. The recipe changed. The principle did not. Cut ahead of what the eye can see. Clean the tool before it lies to the next tree. Seal the wound. Remove the source. Do all of it fast. Do all of it completely. In the bulletins, Klara's name appeared only once at first, in a small acknowledgement near the back. Samuel was furious. Klara was not. "Names are for people with land," she told him. "Methods are for people with work." But Dr. Orr disagreed. He invited her to East Lansing that winter to speak before a room of growers and students. Klara stood at the front in a plain dark dress, hands rough from pruning, English still careful enough that every word sounded chosen. She did not begin with science. She began with her grandmother. "She used to say a sick orchard is not saved by hope," Klara told them. "It is saved by doing the painful thing before the disease reaches the heart." No one laughed. Not once. Afterward, an old grower from Oceana County stood up and said his father had known a version of the same practice, but abandoned it when commercial sprays became common. Another man said his Polish grandfather had burned infected cuttings in the same way. A third remembered sour milk being used as a binder in pear orchards before the First World War. The room changed. What had sounded like one foreign woman's folk habit became something larger. A buried map. Not perfect, not modern, but tested by people who had no permission to be wrong. Klara stayed in Michigan. The war ended. The papers changed. The county no longer called her an enemy worker. But for a long time, some people still did. She learned to ignore the word. She had heard worse. Samuel's wife taught her to drive the farm truck. Edwin's daughter taught her American measurements. Dr. Orr helped her find paid work as a field assistant during orchard inspections. By 1951, growers were asking for her by name. They did not always say it gracefully. "Bring the German woman," some would tell the county office. "She sees the blight before we do." And that was true. Klara saw what others missed because she did not look only at damage. She looked at direction, where the sickness began, where it was going, what path the farmer had accidentally given it. That was her gift. Not a secret ingredient, not a miracle recipe. A way of seeing movement before it became ruin. Years later, Samuel's sons would say that Klara saved the farm in 1945. Samuel corrected them every time. "She saved our pride from killing the orchard," he said. "The trees did the rest." That was the lesson he carried. Because the disease had not been the only thing moving unseen through those rows, so had certainty. The county agent's certainty, the college's certainty, the neighbor's certainty. Samuel's own certainty that expertise had to arrive in a car with a title from an office. Klara did not defeat science. That would be the cheap version of the story. She made science larger. She forced the men with paper to look at the people with memory. She proved that tradition is not the opposite of knowledge. Sometimes tradition is knowledge that survived without being invited inside. Klara Vogel died in 1983, almost 4 decades after the spring she stepped into Samuel Price's orchard and told him he was cutting too high. At her funeral, crates of apples lined the church steps. Not flowers, apples. Baldwins, Northern Spies, Duchess apples from the old Price block that was still bearing fruit. A card rested on the top crate. It said, "From the trees that were supposed to burn." The county agent, old by then, came with a cane. Dr. Orr came from East Lansing. Growers came from towns where Klara had once been watched with suspicion from fence lines and barn doors. Samuel was already gone, but his youngest son stood at the graveside and told the story the way his father had told it. Not as a miracle, not as revenge, not as a German woman proving Americans foolish, as a warning. The answer you need may arrive without the shape you respect. It may speak with an accent. It may come from a kitchen, a field, a grandmother, a worker nobody asked. It may sound too old to be useful. But if it has kept people alive through hunger, war, and weather, then it deserves more than a laugh. It deserves a listening ear. And sometimes, listening is the difference between an orchard that burns and an orchard that keeps bearing fruit long after the people who saved it are gone.